So welcome everyone as you shift around. Welcome to the second day of the 2019 Conference on Spirituality and Education at Teachers College at Columbia. I am so excited. As a native New Yorker, I can now say I went to Columbia, which was a lifelong dream. And I also have been telling people I came to New York to run the marathon. Big lie. I host an NPR midday news magazine. It's called Here and Now. And it's in that capacity that I've had the privilege of interviewing Lisa Miller, and she pulled me in, as she has with so many, into this, the science of the spiritual child, the research that shows that children are born with a yearning for the spiritual. And as Jack just said, ask anyone who's had to explain the death of a pet to a 2-year-old. They have it already. But that is an ember that needs to be blown on. And I'm struck by a saying that I have stuck all over every refrigerator wherever I've lived. In the Torah, it says, every blade of grass has an angel bending over it, whispering, grow, grow. And it can be a whisper. It doesn't have to be a prayer. Spirituality is not religion, although religion can be an avenue to spirituality. Religion is a public institution. Have I got this right, Lisa? Spirituality is the personal search. And Robert Nash at the University of Vermont said, religion is what we do with others. Spirituality is what we do with ourselves. I love the interconnectedness. And I just heard 2 phrases that I'm going to be using in my reporting work. Thunder beings. I come across a lot of them in telling the news. But it also gives me something, a way to describe my beloved nephews, each of whom has had their own issues with education. And soul force. I want to be a soul force, in my work. So our panel today, Teaching Interconnectedness, the Dynamics of Nature, Ecology, and Civility. Each panelist is going to give a brief description of their work and how it intersects with the panel title. Then we're going to look at the whole elephant in the minutes that we have, the picture that they all paint. I think we are hearing the why, why spirituality is important. Lisa cites research that shows that children with a spiritual life, a sense of something bigger than themselves, whether it's through nature or volunteering or church, have an 80% less chance of depression, even if they're genetically predisposed. That's quite a statistic there. But I want to hear the hows. How does it work? I loved hearing about journaling and dream work. How does spirituality look and feel and sound, let's say, in a public elementary school in a disadvantaged neighborhood without access to nature, for instance, or a high school with a culture of bravado. So I'm hoping that we can get some specifics after we hear about your work. Our panelists, and I'm going to shuffle the papers here. Our panelists, Dr. Walter Fluker, author of the book Ethical Leadership, also the Martin Luther King Professor of Ethical Leadership, and editor of the Howard Thurman paper projects at BU. We are both centered at Boston University. My show comes out of WBUR. We have Dr. Sam Crowell, Cal State San Bernardino, founding member of the Network in Spirituality and Holistic Education for decades. He's been doing that work. Dr. Judd Kruger Levinston, rabbi, educator, also author. His book is Sowing the Seeds of Character, The Moral Education of Adolescence. And Dr. Mary Evelyn Tucker, co-founder of the Forum on Religion and Ecology at Yale, combining the School of Forestry and Environmental Studies and the Divinity School, a pioneer in the field of religion and ecology. I was hearing in the taxi ride on the way over, she just got back from China a couple of weeks ago doing her work there. So I want to get right to each of the panelists. Each will speak for 10 minutes. And I'm going to ask Dr. Fluker, because you're right next to me, if you would start. And here's your clicker. We'll pass the clicker down as we speak. And thank you so much. In fact, let's applaud all the panelists as Dr. Fluker gets ready to speak.
I think I might not need this if I have this, right?
That's right.
Okay. And I probably will not do a lot of clicking because I know that we have some very strict time. Are you going to do your own or do I? Okay, I'll leave it alone. I won't use a clicker. I'm so happy to be here, and if you would excuse formalities, because we are on a tight time frame, I want to jump straight into it. I am glad that I'm part of this wonderful, wonderful conference that is hosted by Lisa and her team, and I'm always happy when people congregate, conjure, and conspire. And I think that's part of what's going on here. And I think my contribution really will be with a story. I had prepared a lot because I'm a professor, and it's a statement about our ego attachments, but I'm going to spare you all of that rumbling in my soul and just share a story with you that I think presents the greatest challenge, and I underscore greatest challenge for spirituality and education. And it's a simple story. It's a story of encounter, confrontation, and civility. It is also a metaphor about the challenges and opportunities for creating and sharing space in a democracy among competing visions of America's future. Visions that are held by and often separate educational leaders. The encounter that I'm talking about was an unfortunate but illuminating experience that reminded me of what is at stake in our difficult conversations about race and citizenship and a host of other realities that converge and often collide at the intersection of life worlds and systems. About 7 years ago, in a crowded parking lot at the corner of West Paces Ferry and North Side Parkway in Atlanta, Georgia, Jerry Wells would know about this place, I was kind of in a hurry searching for a parking space. And for people who know me well, I never know where I am, and I get lost often. I'm kind of a black Mr. Magoo. So I was in a hurry to meet my son's future father-in-law. And I wanted to be on time as a sign to him of the kind of family he was inheriting. In my concentration on trying to find a space, I suddenly realized that I was driving in the wrong direction in a one-lane space. When I saw a woman moving towards her car, however, I looked through my rearview mirror to make sure that no one was behind me, and decided to wait in hopes of making an expeditious entry once she departed. As I waited for her, I noticed that a fine-looking middle-aged white gentleman driving a top-down red convertible with a huge shaggy dog in the passenger seat entered the lane driving in the proper direction. I thought he had stopped to accommodate the other driver's exit. I reasoned to myself, since I was not obstructing traffic and no one was behind me, that the gentleman in the top-down red convertible was extending a courtesy to the other driver as she backed out of the space, and that he would extend the same to me. But after the woman exited, this fine-looking gentleman in the really cool red convertible rushed into the space, signaling his conquest of disputed territory. Perhaps I'd been living in New England too long, Jerry, and had forgotten my place in the genteel southern culture of Atlanta. So when I cavalierly questioned his aggressive conquest of the space with the exclamation, "How dare you?" He responded with a racial insult filled with an old venomous tone that left me unsettled, disarmed, and in disbelief. "How black of you!" he shouted back at me with a vitriol that I found disturbing and disproportionate to the context. After all, it was just a parking space. He continued to insult me by shouting that the problem in this country is that Obama and the rest of you think that you can just take over everything. By the way, this was on August 31st, 2012. I'll never forget this day, during the height of the President Barack Obama, well, I should say Barack Hussein Obama's second campaign for the presidency of the United States. I was unaware that I, nor Obama, nor the millions of people who voted for him really wanted to take this country from anyone. On that very special day, I just wanted to find a parking space and to meet with my son's future father-in-law. I admit it was an awkward situation and that I was guilty of a time-honored American tradition of grabbing the first available space in a crowded parking lot. I was guilty of improvisational driving, and for that, I offer a public apology to you who are here and all good-standing American citizens who follow the rule of law and traditional parking lot etiquette. I should add that I was momentarily enraged and pondered the option of getting out of my car and walking over to him and demanding that he explain his response. I am from Chicago. I also considered the option of parking behind him in protest and making a scene. But neither of these seemed a legitimate response since I had transgressed by entering the wrong lane. Instead, I decided to move along and find another parking space, which I eventually did. But on my way to the restaurant, I saw him again. Thunder, whatever they're called, I saw him again and could not resist wishing him a good day. I admit it was a petty, sarcastic, and defeatist response. But what was I to do short of starting a raucous in which no one would emerge feeling good about themselves? Especially not I, since there were two white policemen in the other lane who had observed our earlier exchange. History, personal experience, and contemporary events involving white policemen and black men suggested that I had limited, if any, civil options, except to move on. 3 years after the end of President Obama's two-term presidency and the election of Donald J. Trump as the 45th President of the United States, I think there's a deep and profound issue that threatens the very future of our republic and democracy, and is one of the problematics that we must engage in education and spirituality. In the midst of the ideological divide of politics during this season of making America great again, we have been revisited by an older, more sinister problem than a parking space. It is a campaign to reconfigure time and space back to an era where certain non-white people knew their place in the racial architecture of this nation, what Wiana Lubiano calls the house that race built. This challenge has a long and difficult history, which time does not permit us to discuss here. But I do want to say, and where am I? Who is the timekeeper? Where am I? 2 minutes? I do want to say that one of the biggest challenges, if not the greatest, for spirituality is to find ways to connect with justice. I am a compassionate being. I'm with the Dalai Lama. I cannot bear the suffering. I look at you and I cannot bear the sight of your suffering. But compassion without justice is superficial and lonely and alienated, and it seeks justice to be whole. Our big challenge in democracy, I would add, is a new kind of civility, which is not simply dysfunctional civility, as we do in the South, say, oh dear, and very dismissive, or the kind of civility that's more of an etiquette and good manners. Our challenge is to find a transformative civility which awakens the world. It's my prayer that in this conference and in our discussions that we'll have time to think about the hard lessons of living in democratic space in different kinds of bodies. Black bodies, brown bodies, yellow bodies, even orange bodies, as I said yesterday, gay bodies, lesbian bodies, transgendered bodies. What makes civility real is when we're able to create space and sustain democratic space for others. I'll make my entire little talk available if people want to see the rest of this. Thank you very much.
Why don't you go next, Dr. Sam Crowell?
Oh, thank you. Yes, I will use those. I think so. No, you had it before. Yes, the blue. There. Back. There we go. That's fine. Thank you. Down. Which one? Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you so much for that. That was really wonderful. I'm already inspired in so many ways this morning, and thank you, Jack. That was just an amazing introduction of the entire day and what this conference and what our work is all about. I'm very honored to be here and be a part of this gathering, and I thank you so much for the invitation. I'd love to share with you just a few things today, this morning, about my work. I've been working in terms of teaching interconnectedness for a number of decades, and I'd like to share what that looks like and what it feels like, and some of the examples of schools and areas that are implementing it in their practice. So I thank you so much for this chance to do it. And I'm going to, one of the things that has influenced me quite a bit in the last 10, 15 years especially is the International Earth Charter. So I'd like to acknowledge that, and you have a copy of it in your pamphlets. And one of the things that the Earth Charter did for me was to organize some of the aspects of interconnection and connectedness and relationship to our lives in a very real and important way. And these things often come around as abstractions. As we talk about connectedness, we talk about interconnection, we talk about relationship. Well, what does it mean? We talk about connecting with the earth and its power and its force, but how do we do that? So my work has been trying to live it out, not just teach about it, and to participate in the activities of trying to perceive and see a different kind of world, a world view, if you will. So I'm going to ask you to actually participate with me for just 30 seconds, and I'm going to ask you to stand. Thank you. This is a very simple activity that I usually use with everybody, whether I'm teaching a doctoral course or whether I'm working in a kindergarten class. And it simply goes like this. Down is the earth, up is the sky, there are my friends, and here am I. Good morning, good morning, good morning. So will you do that with me? This is a kindergarten greeting, and it's part of a morning ritual. So, if you will, in your kindergarten voices, down is the earth, up is the sky, there are my friends, here am I. Good morning, good morning, good morning. Ah, so great, thank you. Yes. Now, I've just taught the Earth Charter. How is it that we can be connected to the earth in a real and visceral way? And connected to the cosmos and the story of the cosmos, that journey about who we are. How can we connect deeply to ourselves, to others? There are my friends, and here am I. So this notion of connectedness is what we're about. It's who we are. And as I have a slide on there, is that the second one, connectedness is the nature of the universe. It is the reality that we're trying to understand and trying to bring about. I wanted to suggest that as we move into this teaching of connection, that there are two major questions that I try to to encourage students and teachers and professionals of all kinds to bring about. And that is, what kind of person do we want to be? What kind of world do we want to live in? And those two questions, when we talk about connection, when we talk about the values and we talk about our commitments and our purposes, we try to center on those two questions always. It matters. If we are truly connected, it matters who we are. It really matters what we do, how we think, how we are with other people. And if we are truly connected in real and tangible ways, then it matters about the questions we ask. And what I found in my experience is that students want to feel as an agent in the world. They don't want to be passive. And when schools allow this activity to be a part of, have students be a part of what's happening in their lives, there's an energy that you can't contain. So I want to invite you in your imaginations to visit with me to the Whole Life Learning Center, a school in Austin, Texas. And in that school, if you start to walk on the campus, you're going to see groups of students working with goats and chickens, or you'll see groups in their permaculture gardens. And they're understanding and learning how to care for the animals and the plants. They're learning the interrelationships and the ecological connections that are happening all around them. And as you were to talk with them, they would be able to tell you exactly what's going on, exactly how one thing relates to another, and to another, and to another. If you were to go inside one of the buildings, you'll see groups of students working on projects that they've designed, that they've collaboratively talked through and researched and planned with one another. If you go outside into another building, you'll see students in a circle, and they're talking about the theme of the week, and that theme is courage and persistence. And they talk about how that sense of courage and persistence relates to their lives, relates to their families, relates to the world they're part of, relates to what they're doing in school and outside of school. You'll find questions about what does it mean to be courageous and persistent in what kind of person do I want to be? What does it mean to be courageous and persistent in pursuing the kind of world that we want to live in, a world that's caring and has a sense of belonging, a world that has a sense of ecological integrity, that has an understanding of what it means to be just and what it means to have a sense of deep well-being. So these kinds of questions you would find in the circle, and as they explore those themes throughout the week. If you were to walk outside into another corridor, you would find a learner and a mentor sitting next to each other with a circle of values. And the circle of values that they have in this particular place is one of spirit, one of heart, one of mind, and one of body. And there are questions that the learners have prepared before they've ever gotten together. What is it in terms of spirit that you're passionate about, that gives you a sense of meaning, that gives you a sense of purpose, that you really want to commit to? And they have that discussion. And one of the learners might look at what she's written, and she says, service. I want to serve. I want to love. I want to be an important part of what's around me. As they move to the questions of heart, how can you open your heart to yourself, to other people, to what's really in your soul? And the answers or the discussion goes around the what's been written on her form as she says, I want to serve. I want to listen. I want to be a part of what's around me. And as she goes through the mental and as she goes through the body, And as she goes through the health and well-being of her life, they have this rich, powerful conversation with one another. So these sorts of things, connection is the nature of the universe. They don't just happen and they're gone. They happen because there's a communication, there's a powerful understanding that how do we bring this realization. It isn't just seeing connection, it's feeling it and it's living it through. And that's what culture provides, and as we move connectedness into the culture of learning, it becomes a powerful vehicle for changing lives, for transforming what we're about, and for setting a new direction for our world. Thank you.
Dr. Sam Crowell, and now we'll have Dr. Judd Kruger at Levinston.
And it's beautiful.
Yeah. Okay, here we go. Great, thanks so much. Are you Kathy? Good morning. It's really an honor to be here, having taken a bunch of classes here when I was at the Jewish Theological Seminary just 2 doors down. I'm an alumnus of the Klingenstein Summer Institute and other Klingenstein programs where Pearl Kane of blessed memory and Maxine Green and also other professors, Renee Arcillo was one of the members of my dissertation committee, so I always feel grateful to TC for helping to shape my thinking about moral education. And I'm grateful to my fellow panelists and to Lisa for inviting me to participate in this panel and to bring a perspective from K-12 schools. Currently, I'm on leave from my school. I'm on a research leave and having a lot of fun with it. I'm exploring play and character development through a network for research in Jewish education grant. It's called the Sylvia and Moshe Ettenberg Grant. And I'm looking at several different schools and looking at how they promote character development through play. I'm working on a book now, preparing all material for a book that I'm entitling The Moral Case for Play, in which I argue that play isn't something extra or ancillary. It's really essential to the moral growth, academic growth, spiritual growth, and spiritual development and character development. In this highly programmed, anxiety-inducing world of travel soccer leagues and high-stakes testing, rigid attachments to electronic devices, are we all on silent, and concerns about safety, young people aren't playing playfully the way they did in earlier times, and many are likely to suffer from what Richard Louv has coined nature deficit disorder, because they're not going outdoors as much, they're not going on field trips, they're not even stepping outside their own backyards or back doors of their classrooms. Children are often feeling alienated from that fun, messy world of snow piles and mud and sticks and hills. I'm sure that we would all agree. Here we go. Oh, this is not my slide. This is not my beautiful slide. Okay, here we go. Thank you. I'm sure we'd all, and also I'd like to invite my panelists. I worked so hard on this. If you want to turn and see the slides, they illustrate what I say. I'm sure we'd all agree that going out into the natural world is one of the best ways to teach interconnectedness, this morning's theme, and to help kids to overcome nature deficit disorder. Some schools don't even realize that it's not even a luxury. It's really a necessity to get outside. And every school has the capacity to cultivate its grounds and classrooms to create what's called a moral ecology and to foster a sense of play for young people that will teach a sense of interconnectedness. In the early 1970s, 80s, and 90s, the psychologist Uri Bronfenbrenner wrote about what he calls social ecology and an ecological framework for human development, in which he developed, he led others to develop this concept of a moral ecology, which describes the interconnecting relationships of institutional, social, environmental, and personal forces and elements. Moral ecology both prescribes and describes. Here's the Haverford School in suburban Philadelphia, which has its Walk of Virtues, promoting honesty, sharing, and loyalty, so that kids of all ages, as they pass between their classes and activities, get to contemplate these virtues. At the Jewish Community Day School in Greater Boston, the head of school and a team of teachers created their own moral ecology with these 7 habits of heart and mind, or mind and heart. Reading clockwise from the left, because the print is probably too small for you to see from your seats. Problem solving, reflection, multiple perspectives and empathy, curiosity and humility, integrity, respect for evidence, perseverance, and resiliency. I saw these values at work in a 4th grade class where the teacher, the fellow in orange, is working with a young man who was violating what it means to be part of the classroom community. And so they were looking together at the disciplinary chart and doing problem solving. And then the boy was sent to the break area, and the child actually acknowledged that it was really helpful to have this break area so that he could reflect. And then he rejoined the group once he had completed his reflection and thought about what it meant to be part of the group. At the school where I work, Jack M. Barrack Hebrew Academy, where I teach Jewish studies, I'm a classroom teacher and also oversee the curriculum, the Jewish studies curriculum, we are guided by 4 values under what's called our Derech Eretz pledge. Derech Eretz is Hebrew for honor, integrity, and just the way of the world. And these values, as you can see from the slide, are honor, moral courage, kindness, and community. And we realize that these have really become part of the fabric of our school, because our school culture, because when our honor council meets to hear a disciplinary case, we consider the violations of honor and community. Classroom teachers talk about showing moral courage and raising your hand even when you're not sure, and kindness to one another when someone's making a thoughtful guess. And candidates for school-wide office will often refer to their aspirations to create or even recreate a sense of community. In research I published in a book I entitled Sowing the Seeds of Character, the Moral Education of Adolescents in Public and Private Schools, I came to describe 3 different moral outlooks, or moral ecologies, and I used the alphabet to really guide even myself as I thought about it. The first category I called authentic and assured, meaning that these schools uphold and embrace a set of traditional values, traditional relationships, traditional ways of learning sometimes, and also clear lines for discipline. I called the second moral ecology bridging and binding, because in those schools, students learn to feel interconnected and also connected to a tradition, negotiating with the past while developing their own interpretations. I called the third moral ecology constructing and considering, to describe schools in which students embark on a process of discovery and self-discovery. Their curiosity becomes part of the curriculum when they construct their own meaning and even challenge established norms. I've come to believe that one can really see a school's success in living up to its moral ecology by looking at how students play at the school. Is play used deliberately to promote character development that will shape the whole child, or is play used as an incentive or as a reward that's easily taken away if you don't behave yourself as a consequence? To be successful, schools have to lay the groundwork for a moral ecology. Words on the lunchroom are a great start, but then you have to populate the lunchroom and see how the kids play and talk and enjoy one another. But you also have to extend the moral ecology of play to athletic programs, the formal curriculum, of course, to maker spaces, and to recess. Play creates opportunities for our students to feel interconnected. As you can see, these students surely must feel at Riverdale Country School, just a few miles north of here, where loose parts and a little bit of mud also gets them really enthusiastic. And instead of having recess aides who make sure that everybody plays nicely, they have play workers who toss things out and let kids discover play for themselves. So having described play, what is play? There's something ethereal about it that some of yesterday's speakers also addressed. Play creates these kinds of opportunities not just for leisure time or chill time, as the kids call it, but as the Dutch historian Johan Huizinga wrote, play cannot be denied. You can deny, if you like, nearly all abstractions: justice, beauty, truth, goodness, mind, God. You can deny seriousness, but not play. Play, like nature, has its capacity to touch our souls. The United Nations recognized this important issue when in 1977 they proclaimed the International Right to Play, proclaiming that play should be a right for every child, whether they are at risk of being forced into backbreaking labor in plantations or in factories, or whether they are at risk of becoming overprogrammed, anxious-ridden, nervous children of privilege attending a selective independent school. Play has its benefits, as this slide shows with its statistics. It translates to academic success, social success, and emotional success as well through social emotional learning, cooperative skills, conflict resolution, cooperative learning, and training not to be a bystander, but to be an upstander. Play also helps us to prepare for parenthood. When I was doing field research at a public school in Philadelphia with teenage fathers and mothers in a high school class, kids found themselves learning how to relate to their own babies and toddlers by playing with second graders at a nearby elementary school. There are many different kinds of play, which I could go into greater depth, but I will let you appreciate. There's appreciative play, enjoying one another's company and a concert or dinner or nature, intellectual play or math play, puzzles, word games. Sometimes it's just a trick to get us to learn. Dramatic play with costumes, rehearsing rituals like a Passover Seder or becoming a rock star at 7th grade. Kinesthetic play, including rough and tumble play out on the playground. Notice the laughter, that is what makes it rough and tumble instead of just rough. And then there are ways of greening a school community to make sure that kids, even deep in the inner city, can play by changing the landscape and turning blacktop into green meadow. You don't have to go off campus, but sometimes it helps. You can go hiking, you can enjoy hot cocoa out in the woods, but also the photo on the bottom right shows a group of students just praying under the single birch tree in the parking lot of the Jewish Community Day School up in Boston. Or schools can develop programs to put bins out for recycling, for composting, and for landfill. As I shared with my fellow panelists just before the end of our recent phone call to prepare for this, I feel that there are 3 words beginning with the letter B that could really guide our students into becoming stewards, adequate stewards, and really bringing nature, ecology, and civility into the world. First, put the kids into boots. Get boots on the kids' feet, and then they can go out into nature and tramp around the woods and the creeks. Bring everyone outdoors, from our youngest preschoolers to our oldest, most jaded big kids. How about bins? Provide the kids with well-placed bins in cafeterias so that they can learn about stewardship by recycling the proper way and by figuring out what can be composted, what can go into the landfill. And then when they go out into the forest, give them bins so they can collect trash. Give them good gloves, and not only will this be a moral experience for them, but also a great experience to take some selfies. And finally, books. Give them books to read that will teach them about what it means to act with wisdom in the world. At more than one school that I visited, students were reading the book Wonder, where they learned about civility and how to behave towards one another as they made for themselves kindness rocks and precept posters. I'd like to close with one of my favorite quotes from the book Walden by Henry David Thoreau. Growing up in Lexington, Massachusetts, I used to bike to Walden Pond, where Thoreau lived for just over 2 years. And in his book, Walden, he wrote about interconnectedness and ways in which everybody has the capacity to create their own moral ecology. Our whole life, he wrote, is startlingly moral. There is never an instant's truce between virtue and vice. Goodness is the only investment that never fails. We have that capacity to teach teamwork, stewardship, kindness, and humor. And so I wish us all success. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi Judd Kluger-Levinston. And our last speaker, Dr. Mary Evelyn Tucker, again from Yale, co-founder of the Forum on Religion and Ecology.
Thank you so much, and I echo the thanks of our panelists, to Lisa, her team, extraordinary, to Jack for his talk, to Stephen Rockefeller for Earth Charter, and Frank Peabody for support of this magnificent effort at Teachers College. I find this to be my bioregion, this whole area. I was born on Claremont Avenue. My grandmother, Mary Evelyn, also taught here at Teachers College, and she was a huge fan of Dewey. My grandfather taught at Columbia University in European history. And I went to Trinity in Washington, D.C., where Nancy Pelosi went to be involved in civil rights in the anti-Vietnam War, that was terribly disillusioned after Nixon was elected the second time, and went to Japan, actually, where my studies emerged in very profound ways with deep respect for the Asian traditions, and my husband's a specialist in Native American traditions. And that's partly why we tried to do this project on world religions and ecology, to bring in the views of nature from all over the world. But when I came back from Japan, the most profound influence, and I just want to raise up his name with all the ancestors here, the ancestors of Native people, my ancestors, your ancestors, but that is Thomas Berry, who had a big influence in the Toronto School of Education as well. And I want to speak from that perspective, along with that of Ted DeBerry, who really founded Asian studies here at Columbia. And the two of them were powerhouses. And it's partly why we went to China, which I'll tell you about in a moment, China and Japan being my special areas of study. These are the places that are going to change the world, for sure. We need to really incorporate their ways of thinking, which are deeply communitarian. A Confucian worldview is self is not isolated, family, in these concentric circles, friends, society, nature, politics, and the cosmos itself. And that image is this whole talk. And that has come up over and over again in some of these talks here. So what I want to suggest is that the profound sensibilities that are articulated in the ABCs here of this program, awareness, belonging, and connectedness, my suggestion is that we need to make even more explicit Earth time and universe time, deep time, in other words. And that is a profound grounding of transformation. There is no question. It was referred to by Jack many times. We have had students at Yale with our film Journey of the Universe and our book Journey of the Universe in my office weeping, reading passages from Journey of the Universe saying, now they know where they belong and why they belong. And now I know where my embeddedness can lead to empowerment. And that is what we need. So the invitation here is to expand all of these extraordinary practices, intuitions, and so on. To say awareness is awareness of wonder, of beauty, of complexity, and of meaning in the universe itself. Because we have, in a reductionist scientific way, stripped away meaning from the universe and even from nature. Purposeless, random, reductionistic, have a nice day. And when we made this film, which was on PBS for 3 years and won an Emmy, and our scientists at Yale said, why did you make the film? And I said, well, to consider the possibility that there might be meaning and purpose here. They went ballistic. This is the heart of our problem, I would suggest. We have the techniques to do amazing nature education, but nature education needs to be embedded in the ecosystems, the planetary systems, the universe systems, the deep time, deep universe time, deep earth time. And when we embed it in that way, we understand spirituality is not a human construct. It is part of the whole universe story, and that is the difference. It's a difference that makes a difference. Thomas Berry's last book that we edited for Columbia is called Sacred Universe. We were blown away that Columbia wanted to use that title, Sacred Universe. We must reclaim this space. If we don't reclaim this space, the efforts will not be able to go forward with the energy and the capacity and the imagination of the human spirit. So let me be practical. Universe deep time. We have here at the Natural History Museum one of the most extraordinary exhibits anywhere, but so is the Field Museum in Washington, the Smithsonian, and I've seen it in London and France. We have exhibits on the universe that will blow our children and our young people away. You take a walk down the cosmic walk after you go through the Big Bang, the great flaring forth, and the planetarium show, and you walk, and every footstep is 100 million years, and you come down from that spiral staircase, and you see one human hair under glass, and it says, "This is all of human history." Wonder, awe, mystery, complexity at every stage of a 14 billion year unfolding process. Children understand this. Children are fascinated. If we take our planet, 4.6 billion years of unfolding, 1 billion years for the first cell. You show them a cell under a microscope, a picture, the complexity of one cell. Another billion years for multicellular life to emerge. The depths of spiritual understanding and wonder and awe. You take the Hall of Biodiversity there, 1998, it opened. The pictures of children standing there looking at reptiles, at fish, at birds, at mammals, at that great octopus on the ceiling. They are thunderstruck by the explosion of biodiversity on this planet in the last 65 million years since the dinosaurs went extinct and the mammals had their capacity to grow and flourish. They understand the power of the livingness of these species. And that is also coming back into our awareness with animal behavior, with the hidden life of trees, how forests think, fungi, mushrooms, why they matter. The livingness of our earth and its systems is coming flooding back into consciousness after a period of reductionism, of deadness of matter. The woman who won this awards for fish as being sentient, she just passed away this week. Fish, bird migration, caribou migration. How do salmon come back to the same streams where they were born and spawn again? There is intelligence, spiritualities of diverse forms throughout these systems. Awareness is there. Sentience is there. Why is Jane Goodall the most famous scientist on the planet? Because she gave sentience, awareness, even culture to the world of chimps. And she is creating for young people magic. These are alive creatures. Every child loves animals. There's absolutely no question. Sentient. They're alive, they're complex, they have their culture, they mourn. We must bring this back in. Spirituality is throughout these systems with differentiated awareness. It's not self-reflexive awareness, but that's okay. If we lose the sense of continuity between inorganic and organic life and human life, we have lost the possibility of deepening every passage into nature education. Every fern, every leaf, every tree is part of deep time. And that awakens, as almost nothing can, a sense of awareness, of belonging, and of connectedness. Because fundamentally, the stars are our ancestors. They created all of the elements of life, and the kinship with animals, fish, birds, ecosystems, oceans is our ultimate kinship with all of life. Thank you.
Dr. Mary Evelyn Tucker. Okay, we have just a couple minutes here, but I want to ask, great, so inspirational. All of you have been writing down books and bins and boots and storytelling, and we had the Thunder people prior to that. All so inspirational. But I'm also thinking that, as someone in public radio, I'm constantly hearing from listeners, we know we're in a divided world, but it's so profoundly divided. We have not just economic inequity, not just partisanship, but we have a disdain and a fear of the kinds of things you've been talking about. I mean, Walter, I am just willing to bet that as wonderful as journals and dream work are, if that guy in the convertible in the parking lot with you ever heard that someone was asking his kids to do that in school, he'd raise hell. I want each of you how do you overcome a fear that the idea of spirituality and education is some kind of a liberal Trojan horse, that has some, or that it is anti-religion, that it's a dulling of, or that it's schools taking over the role of faith and spirituality with their kids. I mean, if you could, with something even concrete, some way of, some technique that would be concrete, that would allow this to happen not just in private country day schools, but in public schools. Walter.
Thanks very much, Robin, and thank you, my fellow panelists. If the guy in the car I was talking about could have simply recognized my sentience, or the sentience of young black men who are murdered, and women who are murdered and jailed in mass catastrophic numbers. Sentience is at the heart of the universe, and I agree, we must dance with the cosmos. But the cosmos needs a home. It must become incarnate for us. And as awe and wonder strikes us as we travel with the stars, it must also strike us in the eyes of the other. Often the other who is strange to us, dismissed by us, unseen by us. So I'm all for, I study Howard Thurman, and if I don't get any other word in today, how many people here know the name of Howard Thurman? I'm the editor of his papers, but Thurman is receiving a kind of resurgence, a revival now, because he's talking about the same things. He was a nature mystic, and he was fascinated and awed by nature and the cosmos. But he landed in the heart of the modern civil rights movement and became a mentor and a spiritual resource for black and white and so many others trying to make a difference in our democratic spaces. So I would encourage you to look there. That's my major contribution today, Robin.
Anybody else want to jump in with just some of those things that I mentioned? And yeah, go ahead, Rabbi.
Sure. I would say when you split kids up and you ask them what they believe about a certain issue, whether it's treatment of refugees or whatever it might be, or even just the perspective of an author that you're reading in class, have them take the other side once they've identified the side that they take. That's very practical, and suddenly, so long as you've got enough classroom control, you can get them talking about a position with which they disagree.
That's what I do as a journalist. And Mary, also, I just want to mention, I know you're going to jump in, but having said what I said, I see one wonderful, not just a sliver of light, it's a sunbeam in Greta Thurman. We just saw, I'm questioning whether kids, parents will accept this in certain schools, but it's going to maybe come from the kids up. We saw what they just did because of, climate change and the awareness that they had to take to the streets.
Well, that was going to be my point.
Yeah, sorry.
No problem. I think, why is this so powerful? Because the next generation is standing up for life as sentient, for life, as Thomas Berry would say, as a communion of subjects, not a collection of objects. That is our way forward. And the power of this, I was in London this summer watching them come out of the subways for Extinction Rebellion, for Sunrise Movement. I like to say we need to have an intergenerational handshake. And by the way, I would like to just say, this is a crossover, cross-blend, cross-mix, this sense that Walter's just highlighted. But When young people in Nashville were taken to an astronomy show at night, they came out, and these are African Americans from inner city. One of them said, "This is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen." Another said, "When I wake up in my car in the morning as a homeless family, I will never forget this moment." Belvie Rooks did a program in Watts in LA, From the Streets to the Stars, for a summer program where she had them describe the lineage of Watts, the ancestry coming from the south, all the way up to the stars. At the end of the summer, the families were there. They were so engaged. These are middle school kids or can be Thunder kids. This is animating. Carl Anthony, one of the leaders of the environmental justice movement, there's an interview I did with him. He has said over and over again, Universe Story gives him a sense of profound belonging, even with all of our differences, Native Americans as well.
I was just thinking, one of the most profound stories I've done in the last year was when the Parkland kids, from the Parkland shooting in Florida, brought some kids from Chicago who had long been trying to fight the gun violence that was on their streets, maybe not in their schools. And the Parkland kids, who knew that they were getting this spotlight, brought the Chicago kids to be with them, to share some of their spotlight. There is a spirituality happening in schools, regardless of how educators bring it to them. And I just want you to talk. I know you've just been in, I think, South America, you were saying last night. You are seeing this in action. Sam, give us some more examples of how this can work on a level where it maybe overrides some of the concerns that parents might have.
Well, one of the things that I've seen and observed is that from an educational standpoint, it works, okay? It works in the sense that something deep happens inside of students. They start to reorganize their thinking about the world. This is natural learning. What we have, for the most part, is very unnatural to the learning process. And once we fragment things up and divide the world into bits and pieces, there's nothing there but the bits and pieces. Meaning organizes information. So information in and of itself is meaningless. It doesn't have anything. It doesn't take you anywhere. It's sterile. It's lifeless. It's purposeless. But when we infuse meaning into what we're doing, students come alive. The energy that they have comes alive. They feel connected to what they're about and their own agency. And that's one of the things we're talking about is agency. When we introduced the Earth Charter, I was in Buenos Aires looking at the Green School movement there with thousands of kids in a very, very urban environment, poor environments, but these kids were alive.
How did it look like? What were they
Well,
doing?
well, you could walk into one school that was a high-rise school in the midst of nothing but concrete. And outside of their veranda or out the room, they had built grow boxes, growing gardens, and so forth. This was an elementary school, but there they were, caring and learning about care and a sense of belonging and a sense of connection. In another school, there was a high school. They were doing projects that actually they were taking ecological issues that were a part of their community and coming up with solutions as teams, taking them to companies, taking them to the councils, city councils, and suggesting other things, taking solutions to them. And they were engaged and involved and just so excited about what was happening. In another setting, in a small setting where nothing much was available in terms of resources, a teacher brings in a simple plant or a simple thing of nature and places it in the center as a symbol of this is what we're a part of. So when we're a part of something, the Earth Charter talks about universal responsibility. I sort of twist that. It's an inescapable responsibility. we can't escape the need to act on our world and to receive and be a part of that which we are acting upon. We're changed, and the world is changed with us.
I'm not sure. We have 5 more minutes. Oh, geez. I mean, there's so much more that we could. No. I mean, just there's so much more that we could talk about. Walter, you've talked about storytelling, and we heard you tell a story that was, frankly, far better, than if you were to go into some sort of professorial analysis. So I thank you for your story, because in storytelling is one solution. I live in Cambridge, Mass now. We have a great public school there, Cambridge Rindge and Latin, 46 languages spoken in the school. Half the kids are in public housing. We've noticed a trend of kids of very wealthy families pulling their kids out of BB&N, the very popular private school, and putting them in this very successful high school. And we thought, oh, this is great. Maybe they're looking for diversity for their kids. No, it turned out that many of the families were doing this because they'd heard that the Ivy Leagues, including Harvard, gave priority to local kids who went to the public school. And these families have now taken over all of the slots that the local kids used to get for Harvard. So I guess my question is, you're still fighting so many different kinds of inequities in the system, but I'm also looking at the very public trials of people paying off schools to get their kids in. Do you think we're in a moment in time, is my long question here. Anyone who wants to jump in. Are we in a moment in time which in fact is the perfect time to deconstruct how education works, whether it's based on testing or looking at the kid's soul? Do you think there actually may be something happening that actually lends itself to this?
All right, thank you. I think this is a unique time, and also one of the things that's a challenge is exactly what you're describing, the demographics, as people are looking at schools and making decisions. And I think the public discourse about civility that we're talking about this morning, interconnectedness, I think the time is urgent. And there are ways, whatever the mission is of the school, whether it's for a public purpose or a private purpose where it can be a faith-based school, I think there are ways of using, whether it's non-sectarian methods to get kids to talk to each other, be out in nature or experience mindfulness or other practices, or in faith-based schools where you can really dig into the tradition and find role models. I think it's also especially important staff development, professional development. Teachers need to be taught that it's okay to connect, as Jack spoke this morning earlier about showing some of your soul to others. That's hard. As I shared with some people yesterday, I had a tough group of 8th graders last year, and I think the way that I succeeded in connecting with them was showing some of that vulnerable side while also figuring out how to empower them to take leadership in their own education. So I think there are many different ways, and it probably begins with how we train our teachers and support them.
Brief comment?
Very briefly, for a while in the 90s, I was at Morehouse College, and we would take students, pre-college and some in college, all around the globe, and we would sometimes bring different communities together who would never meet one another in the United States. So one of these experiments was with young people from Appalachia, or you say Appalachia if you really know what Appalachia is. And African American students, and imagine them in Salzburg, at the Salzburg Global Seminar, out of spaces that they know and are familiar with, and going through these rituals and practices that allowed them, not forced them, but allowed them to allow their souls to shine. And I think much that is at stake around relationality, play, interconnectedness, has to do with bringing people into unfamiliar spaces where we no longer know, so that perhaps we can know for the first time. And nature is one of those sites. There can be other sites, though, that are not necessarily drawn into nature, but places where we meet the stranger for the first time and see in the stranger ourselves. That's part of our work that I think that we've got to go forward
I just have to say, every now and then I go on an extremely right-wing, extremist, conservative talk radio program in Iowa. I just go on it, and they have an hour. and we talk with each other. And you know what? It gets very tender. It's amazing. But Mary, would you want to wrap us up here?
Well, thank you. And again, thanks to my fellow panelists. You know, I think we're all more than aware we are at the most critical time in human history. If we're 150,000 years as Homo sapiens, we better earn our last name. And our last name is going to be, in part, how we put together this eco-spiritual force, this communion of subjects, because we have the breakdown in this country, and I know you're from many other countries, but of an American dream gone mad, an American dream that is around the world, which is filled at its heart with materialism and greed and massive distortions of what it means to be human. And that's why Thomas Berry said such a long time ago, we must change the dream, because the dream and the stories are what drives the action. His book, Dream of the Earth, said we need this new story. And that is, I think, absolutely why these young people are rising up, because the lack of meaning, the lack of purpose is the worst possible thing in a human life. But we've got to be connected to the greatest story ever told, and that is the life systems, the universe story, and young people understand that, and that's where my hope is, for sure.
Dr. Mary Evelyn Tucker. Dr. Judd Kruger-Levinston, Dr. Sam Crowell, Dr. Walter Fluker, they all have books, they have writings, films. Please look into their work. Thank you so much, and thank you, Lisa Miller.